Okay. All right, I think she's ready. So welcome to Advanced Photography for Miniature Painters. This class is specifically structured for photographs of miniatures or dioramas or groups of miniatures in particular. So even though a lot of the concepts that we cover may be different from what you would do with portrait photography or landscape photography, and we may break some rules a little bit, and that's okay. I know we definitely break some product photography rules because I approach it more like portrait photography. So if you've taken my basics class, we will recover some of the topics, but not a lot of it. I expect anybody that's here and using a camera to already know how to set the camera to manual mode and how to find features like ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. I'm not going to be able to tell you how to set that on your camera. I use a Nikon, and both my cameras are Nikon, and I really do not know how to set it on any other brand of camera. So we're going to start out today talking about gear and the things that you might like to have, and why it's not necessarily a requirement. And then we're going to go through some different lighting setups, and we're going to do some photographs with the scene. When we do that, I will do a screen share. I have my camera tethered to my computer so that you can see the photographs as I take them. But because I have a Nikon camera and I tether with Lightroom, you won't be able to see the live view as I'm setting it up with the camera, just the actual photo that we take. But I think it's okay because I'm going to keep the webcam on so that you can actually watch what I'm doing. And I may have to tweak some settings to do a side-by-side so that you can see the webcam and the photograph clearly. All right. Okay, she's got some notes in there. So let's start talking about gear. And I know this is a big question that a lot of people have. And in terms of cameras, we know that we can take photos with our cell phones. Beyond that, there are different kinds of cameras. You may hear things called DSLRs, micro four thirds cameras, and mirrorless cameras. When I refer to my DSLR camera, it's going to be very similar to the way a mirrorless camera works and to the same quality as a mirrorless camera. So those are pretty interchangeable at this time. To begin with, I would recommend for miniature photography a crop sensor DSLR camera. That's a smaller camera like this. This is a Nikon D3300. It was about $500 for the camera with two lenses. A lot of the kits don't even come with two lenses. You could probably get a camera like this for about $300 with one small lens, and it will work great. In fact, when you take pictures with a camera like this and you compare it to your cell phone, you will see a huge difference. Even though cell phones have come out with these really fantastic high megapixel numbers, they still do not compare because the sensor size is so small in the cell phone, because the phone itself has to be huge to incorporate a sensor of that size. So it's really all about how big your sensor is. And that's the main difference between these different types of cameras. So this is the crop sensor camera. It's small, lightweight, it's easy. And if you don't just do miniature photography, if you just want to do family vacations or travel, this is a great camera to travel with too. And if you get it lost, broken, stolen, you're out $300, not like $2,000 or $3,000. All right, close up. The next camera I have here, this is a full frame DSLR camera. It's a very, very large camera, very heavy. These cameras run about $2,000 just for the body alone. And then you're looking at $500 a lens on the low end of price tag. It's really not a requirement for this type of photography. These are high level professional cameras made for people who do the photography as a job. This is the camera I will be using today, though, the big one, because this one I can actually tether to the computer and show you guys the photos when I can't really do that live with the smaller camera. Otherwise, I would. And then the other camera that I mentioned is the Micro Four Thirds camera. Those are your small cameras that, you know, mom used to pull out of her purse and be like, cheese, smile, take a family photo, we're at the zoo. Those are coming back in popularity, and they're great cameras for everyday use or out and about or to keep in your pocket. But the sensor size again on those is very small, and you're not going to get those high quality photos like you do with the DSLR cameras. I could give you some technical specs on the sensor size just to give a comparison. Your sensors in the full frame cameras are 36 by 24 millimeters, usually. Crop sensors are 23 by 15 millimeters. Micro Four Thirds tend to be 17 by 13 millimeters. And your cell phone camera tends to have about a 10 millimeter sensor. And when it comes to letting in light and capturing all those beautiful pixels and all that light range, it's a big difference. Okay. Any questions about cameras before I move on?
There were a few questions about specific cameras.
Brand does not really matter. When I got started in photography years ago, for me, the biggest thing that made me pick up the Nikon camera was that I have very small hands and I could hold it with one hand easily. It's also why I don't use the battery pack on the bottom of my camera, because I have little kid-sized hands and I can't hold on to those bigger cameras. And that is the only reason. When it comes to brand, it's what if you're getting a DSLR, it's just personal preference. In fact, right now, Panasonic is making some really good cameras and their price points are fantastic. Sony has good cameras. It's just do your research on that and what you can afford and what features you want. For me also, it was lens interchangeability. I can take old lenses that are 50 years old and put them on my Nikon cameras because the mounts haven't changed and I don't need an adapter. Whereas the newer cameras have changed their mounts over the last 20 years. Any more questions? About the cameras. We'll get into lights and stuff in a minute. Okay. So let's talk about lenses real quick. I have multiple lenses, but for miniature photography, I stuck almost exclusively with macro lenses. And the reason I do that is because a macro lens will let you focus on something that is actually physically closer to the lens. So say, for example, I have a miniature. Let me grab one. Look at this pirate with a spyglass. And I want to focus on this little miniature. If I have a macro lens, I can put that miniature this close to the lens. What that does is it fills the frame in the photo with so much of the miniature that I don't have to crop much out, which means I'm getting the highest resolution possible of the miniature. If I do not use a macro lens, a lot of these lenses have to be a couple feet away, a foot away, maybe 2 feet away in order to actually physically focus on your subject. And that's a non-macro lens. What that does is that means the subject's further away from the camera, your miniature, and you're going to have a lot more blank space around the miniature, which means you're going to have to crop that off and you're going to have less pixels in the end, which is going to be a lower resolution photo. I hope that answers questions, because I know there were a lot of people that didn't understand why it was important to use a macro lens. It's not so that I can zoom really close in on the miniature or see extreme detail. It's just to get the highest resolution possible because of focus distance. It also, if you don't have a lot of space and you're trying to back up 4 feet to take a picture of a miniature, you're going to get irritated pretty quickly. So
Someone had a question about whether macro tubes operate the same way.
macro tubes. No, I haven't played with the macro tubes because I just bought I just have macro lenses. So the important part about getting macro is just being able to focus on something close to the camera. So unless it's actually altering your lens's ability to focus, it's not going to work, because you're not trying to zoom in. And a lot of the macros tubes, what they do is they almost do a magnifying glass type effect. So if you're taking photos of insects, for example, you can see all of the details of the eye on a fly because it's magnifying everything. So I hope that answers that question. But you don't have to have a macro lens. You could take great photos without a macro lens. That's what I recommend. On top of it, macro lenses take great photos also for portraits or anything else. There's no reason not to have your lens be macro capable. I guess I'll just keep this guy with me. Today I will be using a manual focus macro lens. It's not specifically for macro. It just has the ability to focus on things really close to it. It's not actually a macro lens. It just has the ability to focus like a macro lens. So they don't sell it as a macro lens. This one's a Lens Baby 85 millimeter, and it is a manual aperture only and manual focus only, which is fine for what I'm doing with the miniature photography. And I really like this lens. So, but don't think you have to have it. It's hard to take portraits with a Lens Baby unless you're really experienced at focusing and changing the aperture ring. In terms of what focal length you want on your lens, to me, it doesn't really matter with miniature photography. I try 50 millimeters is great. If you have a basic 50 millimeter kit lens with your camera, you're golden. That's good. You'll just have to be further away from the subject to take the picture, unless it's macro. I have an 85 millimeter because I do a lot of portrait photography, and 85 millimeters is great for that. But in terms of focal length, like I said, it doesn't matter. If you do have a wide focal length or wide angle lens, it's just going to take wider pictures, which is great if you're doing dioramas or groups of miniatures or taking pictures of your tables. Especially if you have a 25 millimeter lens and you're taking photos of your gaming tables, it's going to be beautiful because it's going to open up everything and allow you to see a lot of area. I know that's kind of a quick rundown. It's kind of technical, but if you have questions, let me know. And any of them that I can't answer right now or will take too long, I'll definitely answer afterwards in my artist channel. Any questions on that?
Bryce wants to know, can you give us the number of your macro lens? I assume he means like the model number or the...
Oh, okay. It's a Lens Baby Velvet 85 millimeter f1.8. It should be between $450 and $500. I don't know what they are. I bought it years ago. It's kind of a specialty lens. But like I said, in terms of lens, 50 millimeters is great. But you'll see, I also have a 105 millimeter Sigma macro lens. And it's a f1.8, I think, or 1.4. I can't remember. It might be a 1.4. Okay. There's going to be a lot more technical stuff as we go. Okay, and the rest of the gear, let's go through this real quick. Tripods, I use a tripod when I'm taking a picture with my DSLR. It gives me the advantage of not having to actually interact with the camera. I can keep it super stable. It's just a cheap tripod because I'm not worried about it being super lightweight because it stays in my house. It's very stable. You eliminate camera shake if you use this and set your camera with the timer function. And you can set your shutter speed very low, which means that if you don't have really good bright light, you can open it up and have a small aperture, which makes very sharp photos, and a very slow shutter speed. So you can make sure that the camera can capture light, enough light to make the photo bright. So absolutely use a tripod if you can. I use, let's see. I'm going to start rotating the camera now. We
also did have another lens question.
Sure, go ahead.
Somebody asked, what about a multifocal lens?
Oh, no, that's a good one. I haven't used one with miniature photography, so I couldn't really explain to you how that would react. I'm sure it would be fine. That's a good one. I'll have to look into that. So today I am going to be using the gray card. So we are going to cover the gray card today. Something to know about the gray card is I assume that if you have an actual camera, that when you're exporting your photos onto your computer, that you have some kind of editing software that allows you to export those photos, and then you can change the white balance. I hope everybody can do that. Okay. I have a studio light. I'm just going to use one studio light today, but I'm going to set it up in modeling mode, which is a constant light, which mimics kind of like a lamp. And then I have a camera flash. You can use just any kind of camera flash. This is going to be used to help with 2 light setups or to separate the background from the subject with a dark miniature on a dark background, or to create a 2 light effect. I'm not going to use the flash on the big one. It's very distracting and bright, but also it's getting kind of dark in my office because it's so late in the afternoon. So we are going to kind of need the extra light from that as a light source. Let's see, where's my, all right, cruising right along. Is anybody singing that song now, or am I just showing my age? Okay. Okay. Let me see. I think we're ready. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the studio light. I'm going to turn it into modeling light and leave it on low mode. Try not to trip on the webcam here. Okay. It's pretty bright. I have a softbox over it along with it's double lined. There's 2 to help diffuse the light. I will start with it as frontal light because that's one of my favorite ways to light miniatures, and I have something to talk about in terms of that lighting style. So I am going to put it right in front of my photography area, and it's going to act like a giant sun or a giant window. If you're used to doing the natural light photos that I do in the basics class, that's how I'm going to use this. Not going to use this yet. Okay. I'm just going to use not the light box today, but I do have a cloth background that I can use as a seamless background. Just to kind of show that it's not usually how I do things. I usually put a plinth there so I don't capture the background in the photo. And I'm going to show why I do that. So start here. Gonna put the guy right there. Don't think I can get my light any lower, but that's fine. If you're asking about studio lights or what lights to get, if you're using them as a constant light set, it doesn't matter at all. Does not matter. If you need them to flash, like you're doing high-powered portrait photography and you're trying to freeze movement, then your flashes matter or your lights matter. But for this, or any kind of product photography or still life photography, it really does not matter. And something to keep in mind, if you are using flash with your camera and you have your shutter speed at 200 or 200, and you try and go faster than that, it won't, a lot of your flashes cannot sync any faster than 200, and you'll get bars on the bottom of your photo. Okay. So I have my miniature, I have my gray card, and I have my light. We're going to use it as front light, and I am going to put my gray card here. And got the camera on. Again, to set the camera up. See if I could get it level. Gonna drop it down and lower it in line with the miniature. I am gonna start with an ISO 100. Let's go. Shutter 160. Aperture 11. The reason I'm doing that is because I do have this light. I don't know what it's going to look like until I take my first photo. But I'll get a clue after, and then we can make adjustments. Okay. Gray card in. I have a timer set on my camera. So that it goes off 2 seconds after I press the shutter button. All right. So that any shake introduced by my hand pushing the button is eliminated because it has time to settle. Let's see, share screen. All right. There we go. Okay. Should get the screen share now. I'm going to lower my shutter speed and try again. Okay. And why are we zoomed in? Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Oh, we want to fit. Just got to adjust the focus. It's just hard to do. A good tip when you are doing these kind of photos and you're in live view, put it in live view and press the plus button on the back of your camera. You can zoom in and you can get pinpoint focus by doing that. Okay.
You had a question?
Okay.
I was taught with film and flash was always 125. Is that true with today's cameras?
No. They can go up to 200 with the flash, and some of the professional flashes can go up even higher. On average, it's 200 these days, although a lot of your cheaper flashes will have a high sync speed of 125. Okay, this is what you're getting with a macro lens. And if you can see exactly how far away my camera is from the miniature, it's pretty far. If you can see the setup. If I had a 50mm no macro lens on this, I would be pretty far back. And you see how much space is already around my miniature? Let's see if I can, there we go. It's actually, what is there is actually a pretty good amount of space, because I would go through there and crop that.
So Glenn asks, wait, how did you get that sharp focus?
I rotated the focus ring until it looked focused to my eye. If I was not tethering, I would set my camera to live view and I would press the plus button to zoom in. And then I would make sure the part that I zoomed in on was nice and sharp and in focus. So this right now has an aperture. Oops, stepped on my cable. Oh, well, that's 5.6. So it's pretty in focus. The back you can see is starting to fall away out of focus and look a little fuzzy because the focal plane, when it's at f5.6, is fairly narrow. It's fairly small. With your miniatures, you probably want the entire miniature in focus, especially if you're submitting for a contest. So you probably want to turn your aperture up to f11. If you do that, that means you have to turn your shutter speed way down or turn your ISO up. This one, I'm going to pump it up to f11 and show you, and I'm going to turn my ISO up to 400. And even though we wouldn't do that on a cell phone usually, I will do that with my camera because I know my camera can handle that kind of an ISO. When you make these manual changes to your camera settings, it's all going to be dependent on what your light is like in the area you're at. Everybody's going to be a little different. It's fairly dark in here right now. So I am focusing. There we go.
And another question.
Sure.
Joe wants to know, what about using a light box? Is that okay if you don't have studio lights?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, I would definitely use a light box. I'm using the studio light because I have it, and I have it because I do portrait photography. And I take it with me when I'm doing portraits, but absolutely use a light box. It'll make your life easier.
Next up, Daniel wants to know, how high an ISO can you get away with before the pictures start to turn out too grainy?
It depends on your camera model. On a crop sensor camera, they're going to start to go grainy about 800, probably a little before that. You might be able to get 600 and still be happy with it. With your full frame, this one, I could probably be okay up to 1200. But I wouldn't really go that high. Usually if I have to go that high, I need to bring in more light. I could turn up my light another notch because this light that I'm using can do multiple different levels. Or I would bring in a reflector. So, and then, I mean, if you like the graininess, it can add a little bit of sharpness to your photo, and it can have a nice effect. You can get some pretty creative effects if you have a little bit of a grainy photo, it looks a little vintagey, things like that. So this is what the photo looks like when it's turned up to f11. I think I turned it to f11. I think that's as high as this lens will go. Yeah, f11. No, it'll go f15. Well, that's f11. And the entire miniature is in focus front to back, as much as it can be with me doing manual focus and no live view. So that's what I recommend. And the background, you can see the background is nice and blurry so that it doesn't distract from the actual miniature. That's my personal preference and my style. Everybody's different. Okay. That is one miniature. Now, before I switch up lighting modes or do anything cool or creative, move this in, I'm going to do multiple miniatures and show you that.
Daniel asked, speaking of variable lights, what do you think about modern LED light bulbs, especially smart bulbs, that allow you to change your color temperature and even colors?
I think they're great. I like having the actual physical control of being able to do it in post-processing. But if you wanted to change and have like a pink light on one side of your miniature and a green light on the other and do some really cool effects, those lights are great. And then you don't have to mess with gels. Plus you can use those lights and then set the white balance in your camera to a different thing. And it will read say you're using a blue LED and you set the white balance in your camera to make that blue LED show up white, then the rest of the lights are going to be a different color. That makes sense. You could just some cool things. Maybe that's out of the scope of what we're talking about here today. One thing I like about LED lights is they tend to be cooler than your standard incandescent lights. Cooler in color temperature, not because I think they're cool. Rock on, man, it's cool. No, I mean like color temperature. All right, I'm trying to set up a little scene here with some dark elves and some pirates. And these are all these have been played with a lot. So don't get me.
What shutter speed did you end up on, like f11?
2.5.
And then Emily asks, what about a ring light?
Okay, you can use a ring light, but I think they're too hard without a filter, like a scrim or a filter in between them and the actual photograph that you're taking the subject. They're just really harsh. And what happens if you do harsh light like that is it puts too much contrast on your miniature. And even though we hear in painting contests all the time, it's like, not enough contrast, not enough contrast. Well, the problem is you spend all that time painting your miniature to have a certain level of contrast so that it looks right when you pick it up, like it's on the tabletop. And in your hand, the contrast level looks good. If you increase the contrast in your picture to make up for lack of contrast on the model, it's going to look funny. It's not going to look realistic and it's going to look weird. And having a hard light will do that. That's why when you take photos outside in the sun and it's really bright sunlight, they have these really dark, deep black lines and shadows on them. So I recommend using low contrast, soft frontal light. It disrupts your actual paint job the least. Or just use the light box. Okay. See if I got focus, because I want to see if they are gonna drop out of focus a little. We'll see what happens if some of them drop out of focus. What I'm trying to do here. Yeah. So on this one, if you look at my set here, the ones in front are in focus, but the ones in back are not. When you take photos of groups of miniatures, that will happen because they're not lined up on the same focal plane. To avoid that issue, they all either need to be in a straight line across, or even where the fronts of them all match up on the same line, or back your camera up even more because it widens the depth of that focal plane, or you can up your aperture even more depending on what the max is on your model camera. And I'm gonna have to this is that's what I recommend doing. Also, you can change the perspective that you're taking the photo from and come from a more upwards angle.
So a couple more questions. Matthew would like to know, any advice for the mother purse style camera?
Mother purse style camera. Try to do a tripod. Can you, is it just, it can only do it auto mode? If it can only do auto mode, then just leave it in auto mode and let it go. It's going to be great.
And then Daniel wants to know, what about using the focus stack feature available in modern cameras / software?
So I have tried that before with miniatures. It does not work all that great. It does work, but it's not amazing. When I auto complete it together, it will make errors and not pull the right photos from the right locations. That was me with camera shake there. So what it does is it's blending the two photos or the 3 photos or the 10 photos, however many you take. And it's deciding which photo to take the focus point from. The problem is it's not always that accurate. If you want to do that manually and like mask over, load all 10 of them into a stack in Photoshop and mask over each area that you want in focus, it works a lot better than letting the software do it itself. Hopefully it just gets better and better and better. But you can try it. I don't see any reason. I've done it before. It's just not 100% accurate. And what he's talking about, for anybody that doesn't know, focus stacking is focusing your camera, taking a picture, altering the focus forward or backward just a little bit, depending on if you're focusing from the front to the back or the back to the front, stepping it back, taking a photo, stepping it back, taking a photo. And you just do that until you have a whole series of photos that when you stack them together in the software until you want to focus stack those photos and it blends them together so it looks like the entire subject is in focus. And that would probably work on a grouping like this that we just took here. So this is fairly well in focus. What you're seeing for the out of focus on the sides of this particular image is because this lens is a specialty lens and the edges of the lens will be slightly out of focus. The center is the sharpest point on this particular lens. It's a deliberately soft focus lens. But that's a better example of how I backed the camera up. I maxed out my f-stop. And most of the miniatures, especially in the center area, are good and in focus for a group of miniatures. And that's how you would do it for a diorama. All right, since we're running out of time already, I'm going to move on to an attempt at split lighting. So Let's see who wants to be our friend. We'll just stay with the pirate with the spyglass. He's got, nope, I need darker. Let's see. This dark house has some pretty darks. So these two are fairly dark. Okay. Now, somebody asked in an earlier class about miniatures that are painted with a very strong directional light source that are intended to be viewed as if they are next to a fire and they're in a dark room or something like that, or there's direct overhead light coming from one direction. How do you photograph those miniatures? So I painted one like that real quick today with my airbrush. And that's what we're going to do. And my response to that question is you can definitely use soft front light, because the goal is with the soft front light, you're not disrupting the paint job. And so, let's see here, that all of that detail is staying and looking exactly how it was intended. Because if you were looking at it in person and you painted it with a strong directional light, you painted it that way with the intent that somebody would be standing in a room, picking it up and looking at it. And the room that they're going to be standing in is not going to be a dark room. It's going to have some light. And that light wouldn't be disrupting your paint job, right? Let's see if I got that in focus. So this should behave somewhat like that. This is a bit bright. Try again. Plus, it can always help to darken it down just a bit, darken down your exposure, which you can do after or in camera. I always try and do as much as I can when I take the photo. So it's just ready to go. There you go. That is front light on a miniature that is directionally lit. And you can tell which way it's directionally lit. It's not being interrupted in any way because I put that front light on it. Just rotated her a little. Oops. That was me jiggling the camera. See, you could still tell which way she's lit from. You guys get the top of my head. There you go. However, one fun thing you can do is create some cool, interesting effects by just moving your light source. So I'm going to move my light source. I'm going to turn my miniature. I'm going to move my light source to line it up with my miniature in the direction that she's lit, and I'm going to take the photo. Just down a little. I'm just changing it up just a little, give myself some room since I'm up against the wall. That is lit with the actual light direction changed. It just makes the effect, the painted effect, stronger, but it's really not necessary. There we go. I'm gonna crop this one. We're getting low on time here. If anybody has questions, ask them now.
I've got one. EL asked, can you talk about your choice of background, black versus white or some lighter color like a pale blue?
I always go with black or white. You can use other colors. It's a personal preference. It just creates a different mood. So with this photo, the black background and the directional light from the side gives you an absolute feeling that she is in someplace dark. Maybe she's alone. She's afraid to approach whatever is over there to the side. I set that up compositionally and I cropped it afterward. I had to crop very little because I'm using a macro lens. So you don't know what's behind her. It's very dark, but in front of her, you know, there's something. She's looking that way because I turned the model that way. And I lit it from that side. And I used the dark background. It just makes it feel a little moodier, a little darker, and it makes you connect with the photo better because the subject and the background kind of go together. If I wanted to use a dark background and a darkly painted miniature, but not like give it that dark ambiance, I would put the flash to flash on the background, but behind the miniature, not on the front of the miniature. Did I answer your question?
And then Daniel asks, I noticed that you don't use a remote to trigger your camera. Is that because it's too much trouble or because it's faster for you because you're manually focusing so your hands are already there?
I'm not using the remote because I have a timer set up and I can just push the button normally. When I'm taking the photos, I don't need the remote because I'm right there and I focus and do everything on the back of the camera screen. It's the live view mode. And I use that to zoom in to get pinpoint accuracy when manually focusing, because I do manually focus because sometimes with these miniatures, autofocus doesn't quite grab correctly, or I just get frustrated and I feel like I need to have the control over where my focus is. And it's just easier to push the button right there. I have a timer set up so it doesn't jiggle so I'm not jiggling the camera. I mean, clearly I have my shutter speed very low. It's at 1 of 2.5 right now. So any movement at all will create blur. But that's why I do sometimes use my iPad as my remote, and I can remotely tether my camera to my iPad and see what I'm focusing on, adjust the focus from the iPad and take the picture from the iPad. Right through, it's just the app. It's a Nikon app that you can download. But that's more for on the go. Like if I was at ReaperCon, I'd probably just use my iPad and not even bring a computer at all. And I could edit everything from the iPad. So, okay. Well, that was my example of directional light with, sorry, got interrupted there. Directional light on a mini with directional light. We can play around with that more in my channel afterward if anybody wants to. I only have the one painted up that way, but I hope that answers questions about that. And let's see, I could do some on the light background just to show the difference, but we'll do this real quick. Gonna do dark background, 2 minis and my flash. Hopefully my flash behaves. Now you'll see the on-camera flash pop up. I'm not using the on-camera flash. It's just used to trigger the off-camera flash. I don't ever use the on-camera flash with these things because it's kind of weird. I don't know how else to describe it. I don't care for it.
Couple more questions. The biggest problem I have is to get an appropriate depth of field for ranks of miniatures. For example, historical miniatures, units, armies. Any helpful hints?
Yep, back your camera up further away from the miniatures and set it to the highest f-stop you can. So F16 if you have it, F20 if you have it. That is the biggest thing you can do, but definitely backing your camera up, because what that does is that opens the depth of field range just a bit. So if you've ever taken a picture of a person with your camera set at 1.4, f1.4, and the only thing in focus is the corner of their eye and everything's blurry, but you leave it at f1.4 and you back up like 8 feet and take the picture of the person and you focus on the same point on their face, more of their face will be in focus.
And then Eric asked, most important edit in post?
White balance. Absolutely white balance. Okay, I think the flash is on. Woo, did you guys catch that? That's that flash. It's a little close there for this, but maybe I can hold it. Let's try again. Yeah, there you go. So there is me using a secondary light on one side to make it really bright. If you guys can see that, that's a 2-light setup. I can even like angle the front light a different way. This is where you do more creative stuff. See if we can see that. Yep, I have soft light, so I'm actually getting a good scene, but I'm adding that edge of light to the back. You can do that from above, you can do that from below. If you have 2 lights, you can change the look of your scene by doing those things. Okay, so in post-processing, the biggest things that I adjust, especially with miniatures, because most of it is exactly the way I want it to look because of the way I painted it. Is I just adjust light balance, and I will tweak a little bit of exposure and sometimes a little bit of the shadows is usually the only things I adjust. And then I'll add sharpness to the edges with the masking. I hope that shows kind of a 2-light setup. It changes the mood a little bit. Let's do a white background with these dark guys, but it also like separates the darker miniatures, separates them out. I have a dog hair on my box here. Gonna grab a white paper real quick. These are just cheap cloth things that came with the light box that I'm not using right now. I would show you the light box. It's pretty simple. You just use that as your light instead of the great big light. All right, this one's going to be really crazy, right? This is how you get that really white background. That's how you get that really white background. And then this is going to have to be turned up 1. The brighter your background, the more light you need. All I'm doing to get that super bright background like that is I'm holding my flash and letting my flashlight hit the background, and it's making it completely white. If I rotated it to face more toward the background and a little off the back of the minis, you wouldn't see as much of that rim light on the edge of the miniatures. Any more questions or anything anybody else would like to see? Okay, let's get to them.
Is white balance the same as level in photo editor?
No, levels adjust your light levels. White balance would be your color in photo editor. It's the temperature or color. And so, oh, dog, no. Okay.
Next,
Go ahead.
what program or programs do you take your photos into after shooting?
I just use Lightroom. Your camera will have a program with it that you can use. It should have a program. Every camera should come with a photo editing program afterward to adjust the basic development settings. It's basically like taking a photo that you shot with a 35mm camera and developing those photos. When you develop those photos, you adjust things like contrast, shadows, light levels based on how you're exposing them. That's kind of what these software programs allow you to do. I just use Lightroom. Okay, let's see. So
Next, oh, sorry.
oh, just real quick, what I do, I want to go back to the gray card because I do have the picture of the gray card up. When I set the white balance, I will click the white balance dropper tool, click on the gray card, and that changes your white balance based on what color that gray card is. So for this one, if you can see the difference, that is the appropriate white balance. Let's see, I'll go back. Before, after. It's a warmer photo, my colors are more accurate. So that is why I use the gray card. Forgot to go back. I forgot to show you that. Okay, question. Hit me with
The
it.
last question was about the gray card, so that was perfect. And then how much room would you probably need between the miniature and the background?
Depends on how out of focus you want it and what your f-stop's at. So if you want a very out of focus background, I would put 2 feet between the miniature and the background. If you're using a high f-stop to keep a very sharp looking miniature. If you're using a lower f-stop, you can move that miniature closer to the background. It's all personal preference. We have like 2 minutes. If I have something, there we go. I'll put my note card back here. Oh, I have my flash on still somewhere. It's like flashing. Okay, that is with my miniatures, as you can see. Hopefully you can see in the webcam view. They're about 1 foot from the background. That's at f16. And it's pretty out of focus, but not like completely out of focus. I can move them closer to bring it in focus. If I want it even more out of focus, I would pull them further away. But usually for me, I keep about 1 foot, 1.5 feet, because I like my background out of focus, which is something fun that I would love to do sometime. Maybe at ReaperCon, we can do this where we each get like a foam core board and we get to sit together and make backgrounds by using paint and sponges and fun things like that, paint brushes, and then playing with them to see what they look like in our photos when they're out of focus. Any more questions? We're almost done.
Just one more about the gray card. Daniel asked, does that mean that the gray card is a specific known gray value that you always want to match for white balance?
Yes, it's a 50% gray. It means it's a mix of 50% black and 50% white, neutral. Neutral white, neutral black. Because your blacks and whites can be tinted with, usually with white, it's tinted with a little yellow, and usually with black, it's tinted with a little blue. This is a completely neutral 50% gray. No tint, no color tint to it at all. That's why you specifically purchase a gray card, and you don't just get, oh, let me paint this piece of paper gray and use that as a gray card. That's why there are retailers out there that sell a specific gray card. They're pretty cheap. $5 will get you on Amazon. It's actually, it's a, gosh dang it, these lights, it's black, white, and gray. So definitely use a gray card if you're wanting the most accurate color in your photos. But then again, it's not a requirement, because you could kind of eyeball it yourself or just look for what you like. If you like your photo to be a little warmer, then that's fine. The only thing is if you have yellow lights in your house or yellow walls or blue walls, they will reflect onto your subject and alter the color just a bit. I tend to wear dark colored clothes when I'm taking photos because the light bouncing off of your clothing can affect the color in your photo. If I were to wear a lime green shirt, you would see a hint of lime green on those miniatures from light reflecting off my shirt. I'm gonna have to look up the multifocal lenses. I don't know how that would go with the miniatures. Any more questions?
Oh, we had one that I missed because it was asked in chat. I had heard that you shouldn't use a macro lens, that using a regular lens and zooming in until the miniature fills the frame is better. I don't remember the reasoning, but it seemed to be counterintuitive.
Yeah, I don't know why you would do that. Maybe I really don't understand why somebody would do that. Maybe it's something I need to look up. You're losing pixels anytime you have to crop your photo. Not that you're sharing high resolution photos to Instagram, but you are, every time you crop your photo, you are losing pixels, which means you're losing, because you're having to take your picture from so far away, you do lose some detail because the amount of detail that your pixels are able to capture is going to be less than if you're closer. I'm sorry, I'm getting interrupted already. So I really can't know. I've never heard that, but we can definitely look into it. If anybody knows, please let me know. I have no problem using the macro lens. Oh. Any last minute questions before my servant leaves with my charcuterie tray? So you guys could see the mister brought me this for dinner. Oh boy. Okay. I'm going to stop this screen share. Zoom, how do I stop share?